So when the price level of goods and services in the economy rises, the demand for those products will reduce, right? So similarly, therefore, with if you take an economy, the price level and the aggregate demand has a negative relationship, right? And also, we learned about this now in this lesson beginning. I hope you remember. Now, when you talk about macroeconomics, to measure the level of economic activities or rather the economic's output, we use three different approaches. Do you remember that? What are the three different approaches? Sorry, one is, I can't hear, income approach. So we said, now every time I have to remind this because otherwise it kind of is confusing. So to measure an economy's level of output, we can use income approach. What is the other approach? Expenditure approach. What is the other approach? What is the other one? Production approach, right? And whatever the value you get for the economy's activity, if you calculate it through income approach or expenditure approach or production approach, whatever the value you get should be finally equal to each other, right? So if you adopt income approach, the final value of the figure, we call it gross domestic income, which is equal to gross domestic expenditure, which is equal to gross domestic production. Do you remember that? Right? So when you look at this aggregate demand, so aggregate demand in the economy is actually the demand for this gross domestic production which is produced in the country, right? That's why they have used the word, instead of aggregate demand, they have used the words aggregate output as well as aggregate income. All of them mean same, right? So aggregate output could be this one, GDP. Aggregate income could be this GDY, okay? So, which is similar to the aggregate demand. Is that clear? Okay. So that's why they say these terms can be used interchangeably, so don't confuse yourself. Aggregate demand in the country is created for the goods and services produced in the country, which will be equal to the national output. Or in other words, that is equal to national income. Is that clear? That's why they use the word aggregate output, aggregate income, aggregate demand. All of them mean the same thing. Is that clear? So if you want, please make a note of it. I don't want you all to confuse yourself, right? So when you're reading your textbook, reference books also, you will see these words being used interchangeably. Don't confuse yourself. Okay, so you can see aggregate demand curve is drawn by taking price level to this axis and the aggregate output or income to this y-axis, right? Any questions on that? Now let's see what could create shifts in the aggregate demand, right? So aggregate demand curve also could shift either rightwards or leftwards from time to time due to certain reasons, right? So some of the reasons are shown on this slide. One possible reason for, is that the effect of an increase in money supply on the aggregate demand curve, right? Now, this concept also we will talk about later. Now there's something called money market. So we will talk about it in the next lesson as well. But for the moment, I'll just give you a small introduction so it's easier for you. Right? So now when we are talking about aggregate demand, aggregate output, aggregate income, we are referring to goods and services, right? Demand and supply for goods and services. But in an economy, there's something called money market as well, right? Money market is the place where money is being exchanged, right? So in an economy, there's a demand for money and there's a supply for money, right? So money demand will be a curve like this and money supply will be a curve like this, right? So money also get exchanged among people for various purposes, right? So there's a demand for money in an economy, there's a supply of money in an economy. So where money is being exchanged from one person to another is called the money market. Is that clear? Right? So in a money market, I guess you all might have learned this, no? For A-levels and all of that. Nobody did A-levels, okay, okay, so when the money supply increases, okay, what does mean by money supply increases? What does it mean? Now, who can increase money supply in a country? Central bank, or in other words, the government. Through the central bank can increase the money supply or decrease the money supply, right? So let's assume if the money supply in an economy increases, MS0 to MS1, okay? What will happen to the equilibrium? The other thing, in the money market, what is the price for money? What is the price for money? Now, price for goods and services are measured in terms of rupees, like money, right? What is the price of money? Exactly, it's interest rates, right? Interest rate is the price of money, okay? Because if you want to get money, borrow money from somebody, you have to pay an interest. When you're giving money to someone, you will charge an interest. So the price of money is interest rate. Okay? So this access in the money market will be interest rate. Price of money is interest rate. Is that clear? Okay. So can you see that when money supply in an economy increases, right? What will happen to the interest rate? Now the interest rate was at 0. Now the interest rate become this. Interest rate, what will happen? It will decrease. When money supply increases, interest rates will decrease, right? Okay. And the quantity of money which is in circulation increases from Q0 to Q1, right? So you can see there's so much money in circulation in the economy, right? And the interest rates also have declined. So what will happen in the goods market? Sorry. What will happen in goods market? So people have more money. There's more money in circulation. So what do people do? They demand for more goods and services. They have money, so they can buy, they can purchase. So they will demand for more goods and services. And on the other hand, interest rates decline. So when the interest rates decline, you can borrow easily as well. So let's say organizations, business organizations or firms will borrow money and they also will spend their money on their business activities like capital expenditure, right? So there will be more economic activities created, mean more economic demand, right? That is why you can see when the money supply increases, aggregate demand what will happen to aggregate demand? It will increase or it will expand, right? That's why you can see aggregate demand curve shift to right side because aggregate demand expands. Okay? People demand for more goods and services. Businesses demand for more goods and services. So economy expands, aggregate demand expands. Is that clear? Okay. So if you want, you can write down this explanation because it's not there on the slide. In case if you think you forget, right? So here it's denoted like money supply increases, but how that happens is due to this reason. What happens in the money market? Now, if there's anybody who don't understand, please raise your hand, okay? Or else talk to me after the lecture. Now, I teach and I assume you understand. I don't know what's going in your mind. Because I assume that these are some of the new concepts which you are learning, which you haven't learned for A-levels. Yes. Anyway, you all haven't done A-levels, so anyway, everything is there. Okay, so now here you can see aggregate demand has increased, expands. It will happen the other way around as well. In case if the money supply decreases, that means money supply curve shift this way. That means one thing, interest rate is increasing and not much money in the market for people to spend. So aggregate demand will reduce. It happened the other way around. So one side is explained. So you should be able to explain the other side of it, right? If the money supply decreases, what will happen? Aggregate demand curve will shift leftwards, or aggregate demand will reduce, right? The other thing is the government purchases of net taxes. What sort of an impact does it have on aggregate demand, right? Now, government purchases means this expenditure by the government, what government spend, right? So when the government increases their spending, what does that mean? On whom do the government spend money? On the economy, right? So their spendings, whatever the expenditure goes to the economy, right? So government increases their spending means what will happen? The people in the economy gets benefited. They receive like different benefits. So for example, some of the payments or different types of payments, it's a people who receive. So when the government spending increases, what will happen with the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand increases, it expands. Government increases their spending means in the overall economy, demand for goods and services increases. Is that clear? Okay. So aggregate demand will shift rightwards. And if the government decreases their spending, aggregate demand curve will shift leftwards. Right? And the same case with regards to net taxes. Now it happens the other way around. If the taxes reduces, what will happen? Tax reduction means what? Now we have this tax problem in the country at the moment. So when the tax, okay, let's tell me when tax increase, what will happen? Now there's high income tax and all of that tax on us, right? So when tax increases, what will happen? People have less money to spend on goods and services. Disposable income reduces, right? So when the disposable income reduces, when people's income reduces, can they buy goods and services? No. So as a result, aggregate demand reduces. Clear? So if the tax increases, aggregate demand reduces. What will happen when the tax decreases? People have more money to spend on goods and services, and hence you demand for more goods and services. So aggregate demand, the demand in the overall economy increases, it expands. That is what is shown in that graph. Is that clear? If you want, you can write down any notes. So that is what is shown on that curve. Okay. Okay, now let's look at aggregate supply. Okay. So similar to aggregate demand, aggregate supply is the total supply of goods and services in the economy, right? So aggregate supply curve shows the relationship between aggregate quantity of output supplied by all firms in an economy and the overall price level. So you can see aggregate supply curve is drawn by taking price levels in the economy in x-axis and output in the y-axis, right? So it's a positive curve, right? Just like earlier, like normally the supply curve is positive. When the price level increases, firms will produce and supply more and more goods and services. So supply increases when the price level increases, right? So it's a positive relationship. So it's an upward sloping curve, right? But here you can see the aggregate supply curve is not a straight line. Not like the normal supply curve, price and quantity supply. It's a very straight line curve, right? But here it's a different shape. Now there's a reason why this curve has a different shape. Now you can see at the initial part of the aggregate supply curve, the supply curve is relatively flat. Okay. That means now think of the overall economy, right? If you look at the overall economy, let's say you're starting to supply goods and services. The firms are starting to supply goods and services. So you have more potential to grow, right? So when the prices are increasing, they are more motivated, encouraged. They will produce more and sell more at the beginning. But we know now this is quite linked to this initial lesson which you learned about the production possibility curves, right? Do you remember PPC? Production possibility curve, which you learned at the very first lesson. Tilly is told you, all right? So any economy we know has a maximum capacity at which they can produce and supply goods. So because we have limited resources in an economy, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship in any economy is limited. By utilizing these limited resources, there's a maximum level of goods and services which you can produce, which is demonstrated by points along the production possibility curve. That's a maximum capacity. An economy cannot go beyond this level because you don't have resources. There's a maximum capacity the economy can produce at, right? So that is the reason why you can see after a particular point, the economy, the amount of goods and services the firms can supply to the economy get kind of stagnated. The reason is that however much the price level increases, the economy do not have the required resources to produce and supply beyond this point. Can you understand that? Right? You don't have enough resources. The firms do not have resources to produce the goods and sell. Now, they might be motivated to produce and sell more because the price levels are increasing. But you can't produce beyond that point because your economy has reached the maximum potential. All firms have reached their maximum potential. Maximum amount of goods and services they can produce, they have reached it. So they can't go beyond that. That's why at this level, the curve becomes quite inelastic. Can you see that? So however much the price increases, they can't increase the quantity. Quantity can kind of fix at this particular point. Is that clear? That is why aggregate supply curve looks little different than the normal supply curve. Is that clear? Is that clear to everyone, or those who don't understand, please raise your hand so that I can explain it once more. Please raise your hand, those who didn't understand. So aggregate supply initially, it responds well with the price level because you have the ability to produce and sell. But at a particular point, all firms find it difficult to increase their production and supply because all firms have reached their maximum potential, maximum capacity, right? So beyond that point, however much the price increases, they cannot produce and supply more. Their production kind of gets limited to this level, okay, due to the resource constraint. Okay. So if you want, you can write down that explanation in your own words there. Later on, you will wonder why the supply curve looks different like this. If you want, I can tell it in a very simple form.
Long term also in the same.
No, this is only in the short run. Yeah, only in the short run. Okay. So because in the longer run, any economy can expand themselves. They can expand the level of labor, level of capital, entrepreneurship in an economy. But the natural resources you can't expand. There is a constraint there. But all the other man-made resources you can expand in the longer run, and you can, adjust your supply curve. But this is only the short. So if you want, you can write down a small note there. In the short run, aggregate supply curve has a positive slope. At low levels of aggregate output, curve is fairly flat. Curve is fairly flat. As economy approaches maximum capacity, the curve becomes nearly vertical. The curve becomes nearly vertical. If you want to write down a few more in your own words, you can write. Okay, so even in aggregate supply curve, you can see certain shifts. Okay. Now, most of the reasons for the shift in the aggregate supply curve is supply side reasons. Okay. Now, for example, here, increasing cost. Now, for a supplier, what matters the most is the cost of production, right? So, if they experience an increase in wage rates, or increase in energy prices, or increase in raw material or some general component prices, they will get discouraged to supply. Okay? As a result, you can see aggregate supply of the economy reduces. Okay. So this happened even in Sri Lanka some time back when the energy prices increased and when there's so much pressure on the businesses and industries, they reduce their supply, right? So aggregate supply reduces, you can see a leftward shift. And on the other hand, if there's a decrease in cost, if the energy prices or wage rates decreases, you can see suppliers get more encouraged, motivated, and they will expand their supply. So aggregate supply will expand, right? That is what is shown here. Is that clear? So that's quite easy. Yeah, so that's all. That's all which was remaining from that lesson. So we will try to move into the other one. Do you want a break? No, right? Because we don't have much time. Do you want a break? If anybody wants to go to the washroom and come, I can give you 5 minutes. But nothing more than that. Anyone who feels sleepy, please go wash your face and come. I don't want to pinpoint the people, so I saw many people calling us to do it. Okay. Okay, so this is the final lesson, which is on ISLM model, right? So let's quickly look at the learning outcomes. Can you read it silently? What are the learning outcomes of this lesson? So this is where we are going to talk about the goods market and the money market, right? Okay. So what is goods market? Like in simple terms, where goods are being exchanged, right? Where the market in which goods and services are exchanged and which equilibrium level of aggregate output is determined, right? So earlier the concept of aggregate demand, aggregate supply comes into play in the goods market, right? So in the goods market, You have demand curve, supply curve, and demand curve is called as aggregate demand curve. Supply curve is called as aggregate supply curve. So what is exchanged in the goods market are normal goods and services, right? So here the price levels and then the quantity out. Okay? So that is goods market. And the other one is the money market. The market in which financial instruments are exchanged and which the equilibrium level of interest rate is determined. So this is where the money market is demonstrated, right? So there's the demand for money. So money could include like cash, like notes and coins, and also financial instruments. So what are the financial instruments? Treasury bills, treasury bonds. So all of those are financial instruments. So whatever the financial instrument being exchanged, that market is called money market. So there's a demand for money, there's supply for money, which is demonstrated here, money demand, money supply, and to determine the equilibrium level. So what is the interest rate at the equilibrium level and the quantity, right? So there the concern is about interest rate. Okay. And so we look at now when we talk about this goods market and money market, it looks like two separate markets for us, right? In the goods and services market, it's about goods and services, products what we consume. And money market is different, right? But the truth is these two markets cannot operate independently. They have an impact on each other, right? The key link between the two markets is the interest rate. Okay. So the key link between the two markets are the interest rate. Okay. Now, how does the two markets interact or link with each other due to interest rate? Okay. Now, when the government changes the money supply and thus changes the interest rate, it affects the aggregate demand. Read that sentence carefully and see whether you can explain it. Whatever we have discussed so far, using that knowledge, can you explain this sentence? When the government changes the money supply, so we discussed about that earlier, right? Money supply increase or decrease. And then when they change the interest rate, it affects the aggregate demand. How could that happen? I'll give you 2 minutes. I want you all to think about it. You can jot down whatever and try to think about it and see how can that be possible. Use the knowledge on the money market, what we discussed earlier, and think about the aggregate demand supply market. How could that affect the aggregate demand? I want an answer from everyone. Huh? You can talk to each other, no problem. If you can't think enough. Talk only about this, that. Here, the term aggregate demand. We are looking at aggregate demand. Which changes money supply and change how does it affect aggregate demand? Your relation is not right. When you explain. What happens when the government changes money? Okay, so the government increase money supply, what will happen? Because I do demand. Supply. Is that the same answer on that? Okay. So when the government changes money supply, right? For example, let's say they increase the money supply, the interest rates will come down, right? As most of you all correctly said, right? So when there's the interest rate comes down, people can now in an economy, but I couldn't, no, I have told you earlier as well. So in the economy, so I told you aggregate demand is equivalent to the aggregate income or aggregate output of an economy, right? So in an economy, is it only households who demand for goods and services? Who else demand for goods and services? Firms demand for goods and services. Who else? Government also demand for goods and services, right? So aggregate demand is a combination of, right, consumption demand coming from the households plus investment demands coming from the business firms plus the government's spending. Government spending on goods and services means they are also demanding for goods and services. So government spending on goods and services. So in an economy, there are three parties who demand for goods and services, not only households, right? So most of you all only talked about households or individuals, but it's not only them. In an economy, goods and services are demanded by households, firms, and government, all three of them, right? So aggregate demand is a combination of C plus I plus G, right? We have learned about this earlier, right? Remember when we talk about gross domestic expenditure, the expenditure incurred by the entire economy, it's also C plus I plus G. Do you remember, right? Okay, so it's the same thing. These two are similar. That's why I said earlier. Okay, so when the money supply increases, right, interest rate comes down, and there's so many money in the circulation in the economy. So people demand for more goods and services. Individuals demand for more. Business organizations also invest more. Government also spend more, right? So in practice, the main components of the aggregate demand that are affected by the interest rate are consumption of durable goods, housing investments, and plant and equipment investment by firms, right? Now, there's the interest rate coming down, partner. So when your interest rates are coming down, people will be able to borrow at a lesser rate. So they will demand for loans, right? But do people spend loans on day-to-day consumption activities? You don't borrow and spend on food and drinks. So usually borrowings are, the banks will give you you can borrow only if you are making an investment. Like let's say you're buying a durable good like a vehicle or something like that. Or let's say if you are making a housing investment, you can borrow from the bank. Or else if it's a firm, from the firm side, if they are making an investment on a new machine, new plant, new factory, expansion of the business, something like that, you can borrow. So on such activities, more durable, long-term activities, demand for such activities increases. And as a result, you can see aggregate demand is increasing. So the money market and the goods market are interconnected. When the government changes their money supply, either increase money supply or decrease money supply, accordingly, goods market also behave, right? Now, in this scenario, when the money supply increases, we can see aggregate demand expands. Can you see that? Money supply increases, so overall aggregate demand in the economy, because consumption increase, investment increase, government expenditure increases, so aggregate demand will expand, shift rightwards. So there is the interconnection between these two markets. It's the other way around. When the money supply reduces, interest rate increases, so demand in the economy will reduce. Right? So money market and the goods market are interconnected, right? That's what explained here. When the interest rate increases, these components of aggregate demand decrease, right? Events in the money market affect the goods market, and the events in the goods market affect the money market. So only by analyzing the two markets together, we can determine the value of aggregate output and the interest rate that are consistent with the existence of the equilibrium in both markets, right? So that is why when we are talking about the macroeconomic level, when we talk about demand and supply, or in other words, aggregate demand and aggregate supply, earlier you remember in the definition it was there, the goods market and the money market both has to be in equilibrium. That's what it means, right? So when you are looking at the macroeconomic perspective, the equilibrium in the economy means both goods market and the money market should be in equilibrium, right? Because those two are interconnected to each other, right? Okay. Okay, so looking at both markets simultaneously also reveals how fiscal policy affects the money market and how monetary policy affects the goods market. So we will talk about this fiscal policy and monetary policy impact later. Now that also come into play when we are talking about this goods market and the money market, right? Now here comes to the introduction of the IS curve. Okay, so we are going to talk about this model called ISLM, right? So ISLM is the model which is used to talk about the equilibrium in the entire economy, in the macroeconomic level. In a microeconomic level, equilibrium was demonstrated by looking at demand and supply. In macroeconomic level, we said for the economy to be at equilibrium, both goods market and the money market should be in equilibrium, right? Do you agree? So money market equilibrium is demonstrated in this graph. Goods market equilibrium is demonstrated in this graph. These are two graphs, right? But how could you bring these two graphs together? Because in order to develop an equilibrium, you have to have one graph to look at. No? So that particular graph which demonstrates both goods market and the money market is called ISLM model. Right? Otherwise, may dekha than dekha goods market dekha money market than ISLM model එකකින් goods market එකයි money market එකයි දෙකම එක තැනකට එක graph එකකට ගෙයි. Right? So it is deriving out of these two graphs, right? So we will talk about that. So first, let's look at the IS curve. ISLM model කියන එක curve එකක් තියෙනවා IS curve කියලා තව curve එකක් තියෙනවා LM curve. So there are two curves. And we will now discuss how we derive these two curves and how we bring them together, right? First one, the IS curve. In the goods market, there's an equilibrium level of aggregate output for each value of interest rate. Okay. Now, earlier, I wonder whether you remember, in this slide, we said that the key link between the two markets is the interest rate. Interest rate in the economy affects the goods market as well as the money market. Do you agree? Right? That's what we discussed earlier. Interest rate එක වෙනස් වෙද්දී කොහොමද goods market එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ? කොහොමද money market එක වෙනස් වෙන්නේ? We discussed about it. So the key point which link both goods market and the money market is what? Interest rate, right? So because of that, when you're developing your IS curve and the LM curve, the main component what we take to this x-axis is the interest rate. Then the curves that come at a graph down, okay? So x-axis should be one thing, right? So here in a goods market, x-axis is the price or rupees, price level. Money market, x-axis is interest rate. But we know interest rate has an impact on both markets. So therefore, for the x-axis, you take what? Interest rate, because it's a common denominator for both markets. So you take interest rate. Y-axis anyway represent the output in both the graphs. So y-axis you can leave it as output, right? And IS curve is being drawn by considering the goods market. May goods market ever represent Karanathamai, you have the IS curve. Okay. So in other words, IS curve actually demonstrates the aggregate demand in the economy. Is that clear? The aggregate demand is demonstrated in the IS curve. Okay. So in the goods market, there's an equilibrium level of aggregate output for each value of interest rate. There's a negative relationship between the equilibrium value of Y and R. The equilibrium value of Y falls when R rises and rises when R falls. So R here is the interest rate, right? So when the interest rate rises, okay, so when the interest rate rises, what will happen to the aggregate demand? Can you recall that? When the interest rate rises, what will happen to aggregate demand? Aggregate demand? Decrease, reduces, right? So aggregate demand reduces when the interest rate rises. Why? Because when the interest rate rises, consumption reduces, investment reduces, government expenditure reduces, the aggregate demand reduces. And when the interest rates reduces, what will happen to aggregate demand? It increases, right? So can you see there's a negative relationship between interest rate and aggregate demand? That is why you can see the IS curve which is drawn here has a negative slope. Because of the negative relationship between interest rate and the aggregate demand or aggregate output or aggregate income of the economy. Right? There's a negative relationship. That's why the IS curve is negative. Is that clear? Can you quickly read this slide? It kind of explains what we discussed earlier also. Quickly read that slide. Is that clear? Clear? Any questions on that? So in simple terms, this relationship, due to this relationship, you can see a negative curve in the IS curve. Clear? Then let's move on to LM curve. Okay. Now LM curve represents the money market. Right? IS curve represents the goods market. LM curve represents the money market. Right? If you want, you can write these things down. They're not in the slides. So in the money market, there is an equilibrium value of interest rate. The equilibrium value of R is determined at the point at which quantity of money demanded equals quantity of money supplied, right? So the given value of Y, the equilibrium value of R in the money market can be determined, right? So LM curve is drawn by taking the money market into consideration, right? So at every equilibrium level of, now we know these two are connected, right? So now for example here, when the when the money market was in this equilibrium where the interest rate was at R0 and Q0, aggregate demand was also in this equilibrium. Those two are quite similar, right? So there's at the same time, so both money market and the goods market should be at the same level of equilibrium at any given point of time, right? So when money supply increases, demand, aggregate demand rises. So money market and goods market move to this equilibrium, right? So these two equilibriums are the same. Clear? So at any particular point of interest rate, there's a point of equilibrium in the goods market for which the quantity is determined, right? So taking this interest rate and the quantity into consideration, you have drawn a curve called LM curve to demonstrate the money market, right? But here, since it's representing the money market, you can see there's a positive relationship between equilibrium value of R and the Y. Okay? So due to the positive relationship between demand for money and Y, okay? When Y increases, the demand for money increases because more money is demanded for the increased volume of transactions in the economy. An increase in the demand for money increases the equilibrium value of R. Okay? Now you can see there's a positive relationship between money market and the interest rate. Now the reason for that is when the interest rate, now for example, you can see here in the goods market, when the aggregate demand rises, when there's more demand for goods and services, that means people want more money, right? In order to increase your demand for goods and services, in order to purchase more goods and services, people need more money, right? So they have demand for more money. When the money demand increases, what will happen to interest rate? When money demand increases, what will happen to interest rate? What will happen now? Just forget about this scenario now. Think about it independently. So this is money demand curve and this is money supply curve, right? There's more demand for goods and services in the goods market. Aggregate demand increases, right? People want more goods and services. So when they want more goods and services, they want more money to purchase those goods and services. What will happen to money demand curve? Money demand, what will happen? Money demand increases, right? Money demand increases because you need more money. You need more money to buy goods and services in the goods market. So when the money demand increases, what will happen to interest rates? What will happen to interest rates? Interest rates increases, right? So when there is an expansion in the goods market, when the aggregate demand increases, right? People want more money to buy those goods and services. So money demand increases. As a result, interest rate will increase, right? So therefore, there's a positive relationship between interest rate and more output production in the economy, right? When the interest rate, when more output is produced, people want to buy more output, so they need more money, they demand for more money. As a result, interest rates will rise. So you can see there's a positive relationship between interest rate and output. The LM curve represents the money market. Not the IS curve. IS curve represents the goods market. So here you have to now get into the money market shows and tell what is happening in the money market. People increase their activities in the goods market. In the money market, you have to have more money. So demand for money increases. So as a result, interest rate will increase. Is that clear? Okay. So considering those things, the LM curve is drawn and it has a positive curve because of that positive relationship. Quickly read through this slide, you will understand. Read from the beginning to end. Is that clear? Now, sometimes it might be a little confusing for you all because you're learning this for the first time. And also we have to teach it within a very short time period. Now, this is a very broad lesson. So why the LM curves comes like this? Why the IS curve comes like this? There are so many steps in between we have to explain to bring you here. But the thing is, with the limited time for this course, it's very difficult to cover these concepts in that entire process, right? So I have taken in the most simple form. I have taken it and I have shown it so that I just give you the concept to your mind, right? But if you want to find why it is like this, why the LM curve like this, why is IS curve like this, if you want to find it, please read the study text, right? So there is a separate chapter for aggregate demand. There's one chapter. Aggregate supply, there's another chapter. For ISLM curve, there's another chapter, right? So actually now when we are teaching this for undergraduates in the university, I told you macroeconomic is one whole subject for one semester. So you have like 30 hours just to teach these things. ISLM, aggregate demand, aggregate supply. එතකොට අර පොඩි තැනේ ඉඳන් හැමදේම කියලා දෙනවා. එතකොට easier. But here now everything compiled to you. I mean, we have to teach so many things within a short time. So we cannot go by that step-by-step process. That's why sometimes you might feel it's quite, quite sometimes might be complex, right? But this is not a complex topic. It can be easily understood, but you have to take time to understand, right? So the basic, the most important things for you all to know has been put on the slides, right? But if you want to, understand it better, please read the study text. There are 3 chapters separately for these topics. I can't remember the chapter numbers. I'll tell you that later. So you can read them. It's clearly explained. Very easy to understand. Okay. So this is the LM curve. Did you understand this slide? Is that clear? Okay. So now we discussed about the IS curve and we discussed about the LM curve. Then we will put these 2 curves together to identify the equilibrium in the macroeconomic level, right? The point at which the 2 curves intersect is the point at which equilibrium exists in both the goods market and the money market. So IS curve represents the goods market situation. So each and every point in the IS curve represents equilibriums in the goods market. Each and every point in the LM curve represents the equilibriums in the money market. So in this curve, both money market and the goods market is put together, right? So where the goods market and the money market meet each other, or in other words, where IS curve meets LM curve, where it intersect with each other, is called the equilibrium in the macroeconomic. Is that clear? This is a macroeconomic equilibrium. So at the macroeconomic equilibrium level, you identify the aggregate output in the economy and the interest rate in the economy. Is that clear? Yes. Any questions on this? ISLM curve. Do you have any questions? IS curve represents the goods market, LM curve represents the money market. Both the place where both of them meet is called the macroeconomic equilibrium. Okay. Okay. Now let's see how the fiscal policy or the monetary policy of the economy of the country could affect the national equilibrium. So we discussed about fiscal policy earlier in our previous topic. Right? What is fiscal policy? What is fiscal policy? What does it talk about, the fiscal policy? Because we discussed about it in one topic. Government income and expenditure. What does fiscal policy talk about? Government income and expenditure. So fiscal policy explains what the government does. How do they spend money? On what activities they spend money? What is their purpose? And also talk about how the government earns their revenue, income. So fiscal policy talks about that. So when we talk about monetary policy, what does that talk? So monetary policy is in the hands of the central bank. And what do they do? Through the monetary policy, they control the money supply and the money demand in the economy. So there are basically two arms which control the economy. One arm is fiscal policy, the other arm is monetary policy. Now, why the Sri Lankan economy went to a crisis or a crash? Because this fiscal policy and the monetary policy was not used effectively, was not handled properly. If fiscal policy was handled properly and if the monetary policy was handled properly, then the economy always will be balanced. So, economic control කරන එකම දේ fiscal policy and the monetary. Okay, so the entire economy is demonstrated by, in simple terms, ISLM model, right? So IS curve demonstrates the goods market in the economy. LM curve demonstrates the money market in the economy. Using fiscal policy, which market can be controlled? Goods market or money market? Goods market. Using the fiscal policy of the government, what can be controlled? The goods market. Using the monetary policy, which can be controlled? Money market, right? So in that case, using the fiscal policy, which curve can you create an impact? IS curve or LM curve? IS curve. Using the fiscal policy, you can create an impact only on the IS curve. Using the monetary policy, which curve can you create an impact? LM curve, right? So let's take a look at the fiscal policy first, right? Now, when it comes to fiscal policy, Now, fiscal policy is very broad subject, right? It has so many components and aspects to it. But in simple terms, there are two main fiscal policies a country can follow, right? In simple terms. One is called expansionary fiscal policy. The other fiscal policy is called contractionary. Okay? Expansionary fiscal policy, contractionary fiscal policies. Now, from the word itself, can you just assume what could expansionary fiscal policy mean? Sorry? Yeah. So expansionary fiscal policy is entirely targeting to expand the economy. If the government has the intention to expand the national economy, they follow expansionary fiscal policy, right? So if you want, you can write down. Expansionary fiscal policy is aimed at expansionary fiscal policy is aimed at stimulating aggregate output or income. Aggregate output or income. In other words, it helps to boost the economy. It helps to boost the economy. So one way in which the government can expand the economy, one way in which they can practice expansionary fiscal policy is by increasing government spending. Increase the government spending. So how does the increment in the government spending expand the economy? Now, when the government spending, now if you look at this aggregate demand function, when the government spending increases, what will happen to aggregate demand? It will increase. So earlier, I hope you remember, we talked about something called government expenditure multiplier. Remember? So when government expenditure, let's say, increased by 10 units, aggregate demand increased by, is it 10 units? No, much more than that. So we don't know how much that is. That will expand largely because of the multiply effect. Okay? So government spending increases, aggregate demand will increase, right? So that means the economy's output or national income increases. So through which curve can you demonstrate it in the ISLM model? Government spending increase, aggregate demand increase, which curve can you demonstrate it? IS curve. Why? IS curve demonstrate goods market, or rather aggregate demand is shown only in the IS curve. Aggregate demand, aggregate supply එක පෙන්වන්නේ IS curve එකෙන්. Remember? So because of that, when the government spending increase, you can expand aggregate demand increase. That means IS curve will increase. It will move rightwards. Clear? So IS curve will shift rightward, and you can see economy aggregate output has increased. Also, the interest rate has increased, right? So economy is experiencing an expansion. Clear? So that is one way the government can expand the economy by increasing their spending, government spending. Another way the government can expand the economy is by reducing taxes. So when there's a reduction in taxes, how does that affect the aggregate demand? We discussed about these things before. When taxes are reduced, how does it affect the aggregate demand? Yeah, how does it happen?
How is
Taxes reduce. What happens? Sorry? Consumption increases. Remember? Taxes reduce, consumption increases, or even investments could increase, right? And as a result, aggregate demand will increase. Remember that? So as a result, what will happen to this curve? Now you have to draw it. You have to draw this. Can you quickly draw this? You have to show the impact here and also draw. So similar to this, when the taxes reduce, what will happen to the ISLM model? Now here I have kept it blank in this slide, expecting you to draw it. Now, the exam, I could ask these questions, right? When the government is practicing expansion fiscal policy, show the impact on understand model. Then you will be able to explain these things, draw and show all of it. We have to turn the curves properly in case the element is curve. The other two also you have to draw. If you are done with this one, look at the contraction in fiscal policy side. So contraction in fiscal policy means fiscal policy is contracting in the economy. What does that mean? Now that is what the government of Sri Lanka is currently doing. They want to reduce the economy because the economy is going through a crisis. You cannot allow it to expand because it will collapse, right? So they are contracting the economy. So in order to contract the economy, what is government doing? Decreasing government spending. So they have cut down on so many expenditure aspects, except the expenditure on the ministers and whatever. Everything else is cut down. The expenditure on education, health, most of our supplies we are not receiving, right? So there's a decrease in government expenditure, right? So if you want, you can write down a small sentence. Contractionary fiscal policy means, contractionary fiscal policy is aiming to reduce aggregate output or income. This is specifically used to slow down the economy. So in order to slow down the economy or in order to reduce the economic activities, one thing they can do is decrease government spending. Okay? So when the government spending decreases, what will happen? Government spending decreases, aggregate demand decreases. As a result, what will happen to which curve? IS curve will shift leftwards. It will shift leftwards, right? So can you explain that now using this equation? Explain what happens here and also draw the curve here. When the government spending decreases, what will happen to the ISLM situation? Draw it here. Always use that formula so that it's easier. So you know government spending decreases, what will happen to aggregate demand? Then what will happen to IS curve? IS curve is drawn out of aggregate demand and subtracted from the IS curve. So think like that, then it's easier. That is reducing. Also look at how the increase in net taxes affect this equation. Show that and also draw the curve. If you're done, please raise your hand. Always come that and so when it's a contractionary fiscal policy, both cases the same thing happens, right? So always make sure that you term one thing when you're drawing a graph, you have to term the axis x. That is one. So when I'm giving you marks for the exams, marks are allocated like that. So graph again, axis දෙක මේව කරලා නම් එක මාක් එකක්. ඒ විදිහට තමයි දෙන්නේ. ඒතකොට මොකක් හරි එකක් නැත්නම් ඒකට ලකුණු කැපෙනවා. graph එක හරියට. හරි? And you have IS curve. LM curve. So you have to always term these curves as well, right? And you have to show the initial equilibrium. So for example, if I call this initial situation as zero situation, IS 0, LM 0, or let's say 1 or 2, let's say IS 1, LM 1. So this is output 1 and this is interest rate 1, right? So in a contractionary fiscal policy, what will happen? IS curve will shift leftwards, right? So IS curve shift this way, IS1 to IS2, right? So you always have to term these curves as well. Otherwise, I don't know which way. And also you have to show the direction. These arrows are very important, right? Then me arrow is the right? So you have to show the new equilibrium as well. New equilibrium will be, let's say, output 2 and interest 2. Make it shift එක පෙන්වන්න ඕනේ. Interest rate අඩු වෙනවා, output level එක අඩු වෙනවා. All of these terminologies, you have to name the lines, name the graph, and also show the direction. So everything the marks are allocated. So මේවා අඩු වෙනොත් එහෙම your marks will get deducted. Clear? So likewise, you have to show. Now that is a contractionary situation. That is how the curve looks like. Okay? Is it correct? Did everyone got it correct? Yes or no? Okay, so that is fiscal policy impact on the ISLM model. Now
Excuse me,
let's look at the monetary policy impact on the ISLM model. Now, what
Excuse
is
me, madam.
monetary policy?
Hello.
Yes.
Excuse me, madam.
Yes.
Madam, could you please explain it again using dark color pen because the lines are not clear, visible much.
You mean the graph?
Yes, it's not visible because the pen is, the color is very light.
Okay. I'll use what? Black color or red color?
Black, I think black color will be okay.
Okay. Can you see the graph?
No, madam, it's not clear because some lines are not clear, not visible. If you could use the dark color pen, then I think it will be.
Okay. So can you see now?
The camera was now the camera was adjusted downward. You have to make it upside. Camera.
Yeah, is it better or?
No, you have to. Yes, now it's okay.
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 So this is IS curve 1. And this is IS curve 2. And this is LM curve. Right? So I have shown how the interest rate change and how the output changes.
Yes.
Now is it visible?
Yeah, madam. Thank you.
Okay. Did you all get it right? The curves which you draw? Okay. Now let's look at the monetary policy impact. Now what is monetary policy used for? Adjust what? Adjust the money market, right? So when it comes to monetary policy, also there are two types. In other words, So there are two main types of policies when it comes to monetary policy as well. One is expansionary monetary policy, the other one is contractionary monetary policy. Okay. So monetary policy expansion in simple terms means increasing the money supply, expanding the money supply, right? Now these policy decisions are undertaken by the government, the ones who are managing the economy, right? So fiscal policy decisions are also undertaken by the government. Monetary policy decisions are also undertaken by the government, the ones who are actually managing the economy, right? So now, where does in the money market, where does the government can take an influence? Is it money demand or money supply? Money supply. The money demand, they cannot directly control. They can indirectly control the money demand, but they cannot directly control the money demand. So money demand is coming from the people. People are the ones who are demanding the money to pay the service. The main aspect which they can directly control is the money supply. Right? So depending on the government's objective, they will either expand the money supply or contract the money supply. So at the moment in Sri Lanka, what sort of situation is that? What the government is currently doing in terms of the monetary policy? Government is in the central bank, right? They are decreasing the money supply, or they are rather contracting the money supply. Why? Because they want to slow down the economy. They want to reduce the economic activities. So they reduce the money supply, right? So when they, so in our case, the government is practicing a contractionary monetary policy at the moment. But when it comes to expansionary monetary policy, that means increasing the money supply. So when the money supply is increasing, right, what will happen? When money supply is increasing, does it have an impact on the IS curve or the LM curve? LM curve. Why? Because LM curve is what represents the money market. Now, what will happen to LM curve when the money supply increases? Shift rightwards. Why? Do you know why? Why is that? Why is the LM curve shifting rightwards? Now, LM curve derives out of the money market. That means money demand and money supply. Right? Okay. So, expansionary monetary policy means government is increasing the money supply. So, they are increasing the money supply. Right? So, when they are increasing the money supply, what will happen to the interest rate? Interest rate is increasing. Sorry, interest rate is reducing. Interest rate is reducing. Can you see that? So interest rate is reducing while the money supply increases, right? So in that case, here also the interest rate should reduce. Therefore, what should happen to LM curve? LM curve should shift rightwards, right? LM curve also should shift rightwards, right? The money, since the money supply curve shift rightwards, LM curve also should shift rightwards so that the interest rate reduces. Okay, so then what will happen? LM curve shift rightwards, IS curve remains as it is. So you can see interest rate in the economy reduces and the aggregate output or aggregate income expands. Okay. So in other words, now when the interest rates are reducing, anyway the economic activities are expanding, right? Interest rate reduces, people invest more, they borrow more, they invest more. Anyway, the economy's production, output generation, everything will expand, right? Consumption, investment, government spending, everything expands, right? So you can see economy is expanding when there's an increase in money supply. Clear? Decrease in money supply, what happens? Decrease in money supply means money supply decline. So what will happen to the equilibrium? Can you draw that? I would suggest you, first of all, draw the money demand, money supply curve and show how the decreasing money supply affects this curve and accordingly decide what will happen to a ISLM situation. So when there's a decrease in money supply, what will happen? You have your IS curve like this, LM curve like this, right? When there's a decrease in money supply, what will happen? LM curve will shift leftwards, right? It's a parallel shift always, 1, 2. So LM curve will shift leftwards. So it will create a new equilibrium. So what is happening to interest rate? Interest rate increases. So borrowings will become expensive, right? So output also reduces from O1 to O2, right? So this is your new equilibrium. Okay. And now, so that is how the contraction to monetary policy can be shown on the graph. Okay. Now, an easy way to remember to this IS and LM curve is IS curve actually demonstrates in the goods market the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand and supply in the aggregate demand curve එක තමයි IS curve එක represent කරන්නේ. Here, with regards to LM curve, it represents money market again, money supply curve. Money supply curve එක තමයි LM curve එක demonstrate කරන්නේ. Right? It's an easy way to remember. It's not the real case. But LM curve kind of shows the money supply curve. IS curve shows the aggregate demand curve in the goods market. IS LM model එක හැදෙන්නේ. Is that clear? Any questions on that? Do you have any questions? Okay, so that's all in very simple form. I explained this ISLM scenario covering the learning outcomes, but please read the chapters in your textbook with regards to this section, right? So that you get a detailed understanding. පොඩ්ඩක් මේ නිවර නෑ තාම. නැගිටලත් ඉවරයි. And now about your assignment. Now, how many teams are there? Now, I don't know. I hope how many all of the students are here, no, in this list. Nobody's like even the online students are also included. Anyway, you can make happily online as team, right? So there are two students who don't have a team. Who are they now? MFM Pernas and MF Parley. Are they here in the class? Online. So they don't have a team. So how are they going to do? Now, how are they doing? Are they there in the online class? Student number 174 and 029. Are you there? Now, how can you give a message to them? Have they? I don't know whether they have started the group report. Okay, now with regards to the report, are you all okay? Did you start working on it? Assignment?
Sure.
The requirements, are you okay? Do you have anything to clarify? If there's anything, please talk to me after the class. And your presentation also will be on the same work you're doing for the report, right? So the presentation, like how the marking criteria and everything, I will upload once again as separate document. I did not be confusing with your report. So first of all, focus on the report as the guidelines given. And presentation will be out of the content which is there in the report you have to present, right? And for the presentation, how the marks will be given, how you will be evaluated, all of that I will prepare one document and upload to LS, right? So you will be given maximum of 10 minutes. It won't increase, rather it will only decrease the time allocation depending on how long it can take for the presentations, right? So there's only 2 hours on the 25th, right? So the presentations will be on the 25th. 24th is your report submission, right? So 24th is the report submission, 25th is a Saturday, I think. Will be your presentation, right? So that will be a final day for the lecture series, right? So now within that 2 hours, since I cannot cover, I think there are about 12 themes. Since I cannot cover all of you, one option available is to stay extra time, hour or 2, and finish off the rest. Or else, take another time slot in future based on your availability and do the rest of the themes. So what is your preference now? I have to discuss with Jennifer as well, like how to do it. But what is your preference? Then 10 minutes each කියන්නේ now please tell me what is your preference? Teams 13ක් වගේ ඉන්නේ 13ක් දාන්න කරන්නේ. Huh? Any suggestions? Same day. It's better. Because anyway, මෙහෙමයි 10 minutes ගානටම ගියොත් 2 hours වලින් පුළුවන්. හැබැයි මේ but there's a time, no, so if I have a question to ask you, so for question and answer, there will be a small time taken. And then anyway, like when you know, set up your presentation, there's some time consumed. So at least per team, I have to allocate 5 minutes extra. But please restrict your presentation for 10 minutes. That I will time. 10 minutes already not. But 5 minutes I will keep extra for Q&A. Or a transition time from one team to the other. Right? එහෙම ගියොත් ටිකක් වෙලා නැතත් පැයක් විතර වැඩිපුර යයි සමහරක් විතර. එහෙම වුණොත් බලමු, so I discuss with the campuses that okay, then it's done, or rather than taking it to another date, then your entire thing, presentation, everything done. So we'll do it like that. Yeah, okay. I'll talk with the Jennifer and Louise. I don't know until what time they keep this open. So, in some way, I confirm. එහෙම වුණොත් එදාට ඔක්කොගෙම කරනවා. මෙන්න නැති වුණොත් groups කිහිපයක් පෙර දවසක් කරන්න වෙනවා. එහෙම වුණොත් ඒගොල්ලන්ට දාන date එක මම ඒක inform කරනවා. ඒත් ඒ අය ඒක ඕනේ නැහැ එදාට. No, you're not presenting, there's no problem coming. But if you are taking all presentations on the same day, it's easier, no?
Actually, what from the previous lecture or actually half an hour, because let's say the people who are presenting on second day, they will have less time audience. So.
On the audience.
No, because everyone should feel the same.
That's it. And also you're worried they are getting extra time, for preparation. Okay.
So we can extend 2 hours, but
Yeah, but I don't know if we can take extra time from the previous lecture. No, that is fine. No.
we will take this and see.
Who is there?
Only half an hour would be enough because we can reduce the break time by half an hour.
Are you all okay with that? We can to start around 3 o'clock without break.
We have like 10 minutes to break that time.
Yeah, so if you can discuss with everyone and come to a consensus and tell me, then I'm okay. Right? And I will see how many extra time we can get afterward. Don't know what time they are closing this building. So, let's see how we are going to do it. And so anyway, 25th will be your presentation, right? And will be done. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please ask me. The guidelines for presentation I will ask. The students who are joining from online, do you have any questions about the presentation, about the assignment? Do you have any questions? Now there are 2 students who are not in any of the group. One is MFN Furnas, other one is MF Pali. Are they there in the Teams meeting? Now, can someone, if you know them, can you give them the message that they are not in any of the team How are they doing their group assignment and the presentation?
Actually, madam, we don't know them because, but if the class coordinator could contact them through the WhatsApp group, then they'll be able to get that message.
Okay. So in the WhatsApp group, they must be there, no?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll tell the class student representative to put a message there, right?
Yes.
Now, everyone else has groups, right? I hope you all have started your assignment.
Yeah, madam.
So if you have any issue with the presentation or on the assignment, please let me know.
Okay,
Right?
madam.
You can ask me
Miss
now,
Methma?
or you can
Hello, Miss
you
Methma.
can email me.
Miss Methma, do you hear me?
Yes.
Miss Methma, I have one concern regarding this group presentation. How it will be? I mean, the 10 minutes we have to turn on the video and do the presentation, or I mean,
Yes.
some,
The ones who
yeah.
are joining online. Yeah, then you have to join through Teams. Now, are all your members online or there are on-site members as well?
Our team is Methma. 5 members are from online and 1 from physical group, physical class.
Sorry?
5 members online and 1 member from physical class.
Okay. So the one
Yeah.
who's in the physical class can start the presentation, plugging in the presentation slides and all of that. And then when your turn comes, you can switch on your video and present on through Teams. Through the Teams meeting.
Okay.
Okay. So the one who's in the class can start by plugging the presentation. And then the rest of the members can join through Team. And then when your turn comes, you can switch on your video and do your part. The one who's here can change the slides.
Okay. Then actually, I'm joining from Qatar. Actually, the both days are working days for me. So then I have to take one leave and go. That's what I just asked Ms. Methma, whether we have to on the video or not.
Yes, better if you can switch on the video. Now, this is on the 25th, no, otherwise it will be difficult to take another day.
Yeah, I understand. Better to take on a single day.
Yeah, from the class timetable, that's why I thought to take a time. Otherwise, now even your other days, like Saturday, Sunday, both are full of lectures, no?
Yeah.
Then it's again difficult to take a time from the weekday because everyone is working.
Yes, correct. That's correct.
So this is just for a very short time to just see whether you can, join without taking leave. That will be maximum for 10 minutes, no?
Yeah, we'll adjust somehow, Ms. Methma. We'll adjust.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions? If you have any concern, you can email me, right? Then I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Ms. Methma.